Minister Rijavec, Minister Žmauc, Excellencies, honorable guests, esteemed representatives of business, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the opening of the Business BSF Strategic Forum. The world's financial markets nearly collapsed 6 years ago for one reason, the lack of trust. Trust is essential to building enduring connections with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities in which they do business. And it drives to the risk-taking that leads to innovation and progress. But how do we gain it? It doesn't hurt to be honest and ethical. The best way to build trust is to extend it to others, to build trust in business by trusting. The power of trust is the main theme of this year's BSF Strategic Forum, and we would like to address it at the upcoming 3 panels on energy and infrastructure, economic cooperation with India, and new technologies. Also, let's not forget the panel discussion with the President of the European Investment Bank, Dr. Werner Hoyer, and the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Sir Suma Chakrabarty, who are also this year's keynote speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, economic diplomacy is a priority of the Slovenian Ministry for Foreign Affairs and its diplomatic network. Through our activities in the past year, we have gained the trust of Slovenian and foreign companies. Minister Rijavec has always stressed the importance of economic diplomacy and took a great interest in business opportunities and challenges we are facing today. It gives me, therefore, a great pleasure to invite him to join me and deliver his opening remark. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Dear guests, esteemed business representatives, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the business platform of the BSF Strategic Forum. The 3rd edition of the Business Forum will again highlight and address the pressing issues and vital questions in the economic environment. It will offer the participants a chance to find new business opportunities and exchange views and experience on key challenges in today's world. As trust is the main subject of the 9th BSF Strategic Forum and the core value of all business activities, we will also address it in the business part of the forum. Trust builds connection, creates jobs, keeps customers, and generates progress. It's an essential part of well-functioning societies and is fundamental for generating social capital and sustainable economic growth. This year, Business BSF Strategic Forum will be devoted to promoting cooperation between different parts of Europe and integrating Southeast Europe in the infrastructure and energy network. It will also look into and discuss the role and opportunities of new technologies and the role of the technology parks, centers of excellence, and startup incubators. I'm very pleased that a special panel will be dedicated to the economic cooperation between India and Central and South Europe. With its dynamic and vibrant economy, India is becoming a driving force of the future. We will look at the opportunities and ways to enhance business cooperation. In this opportunity, I would like to welcome the high representatives of the Indian government, Indian business people, and members of the Slovenian Indian Business Club. For the conclusion, I would also like to draw your attention to the special panel dedicated to the power of tourism. Tourism is a major driving force of growth and development. The discussion will focus on the future role of global tourism and its modern trends. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we all agree that trust is the foundation of successful and long-term economic partnership. Yet, it takes two to build trust, so I hope the forum will offer opportunities to strengthen mutual trust, generate fresh and new ideas and identify new areas of cooperation and forge new partnerships. Economic diplomacy remains a priority area for our ministry and its diplomatic networks. I would invite you all to benefit from our knowledge, assistance, and support. I wish you all many successful debates. Thank you very much for your attention, and all the best.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And now I would like to introduce our next two speakers, our strategic partners and loyal friends of the Bled Strategic Forum. Let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude for all the support and belief they have placed in the forum over the past years. The first speaker is Professor Danica Purk, Dean and President of the IDC Bled School of Management and International Educator of the Year 2010, nominated by the Academy of International Business. The IDC Bled School of Management is the leading management and leadership development institution in Central and Eastern Europe and an agent of change in this part of the world. Its mission is to attract the most promising executives and top managers, provide them with world-class management education and other relevant services in an international context, inspire them for long life learning, and prepares them to act as competent and ethically responsible transformational leaders in their organizations and society at large. Dr. Purk, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Good morning and welcome to Forum also on behalf of IDC Bled School of Management. We are glad to be a partner to this great venture, and we are very happy that the title is The Power of Trust. The organizers were right to see trust as the most needed in this time. We didn't see that 23 years ago in our school, that will be such a big issue. When we started to introduce ethics in our school as a required subject, I'm very proud to say that 23 years ago already, we started to teach this subject. It was at the same time that Stanford did it and some other business schools in the world. And we got a prize by Aspen Institute some years ago to be one of the most innovative schools in this area, in this field. I believe that in former times, doing business in smaller geographical scale, it was easier to find trustful business relations. Everybody knew each other, and so you knew with whom you are cooperating. In globalized world, we have to reinvent the way to build trustful relations, and certainly not only from business to business, but also between business and politics. And it is not only about trust from person to person, but also trust in the political and economic system and the sustainability of it. And the most important is building trust between business and consumers. Companies are nowadays more than ever evaluated on the basis of their business ethics, their compliance with legislation and conventions, and their contribution to a better world. I'm very happy to see the students who are really interested in where do they come, not only what they will learn, but how they will feel and how they will enrich themselves, how ethical you behave, how much you will be talking about dilemmas of nowadays world. Because we don't preach what is good and what is bad, but we are exposing the most important dilemmas. And around those dilemmas, the discussion of leaders is developed and the learning lessons are, the lessons are taken. So I would like to say that we are very happy to see that that Bled Strategic Forum is really investing in youngsters, because that is what is really growing. And we are very proud that we were hosting these days the Young Strategic Forum, and also that we shall have tonight. We start with the second high-level symposium with 16+1 with Chinese delegation. And I would like to use this occasion to tell you that tourism is also, in our view, the view of our school, very important branch, and that's why we decided, and for Slovenia also, and for all the region, and for the whole world, and that's why we decided to start in the beginning of next year with the top management seminars and studies on tourism management, just that you know that that will happen. So I would like to wish you a beautiful, inspiring day, and I hope that you will find some great new relations to build on in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Purk, and thank you once again for hosting the Young Bled Strategic Forum at your school. And our second speaker, he is a founder and managing director of the Slovenian company RICO, philanthropist, patron of arts and culture, as well as honorary consul of Kingdom of the Morocco, and an active member of many diplomatic business clubs. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Janez Škrabec, who has won a number of major awards for his business excellence and entrepreneurial success. According to this year, Klein Partners High Standard Research, he's the second most prominent manager, and his company, RICO, the 16th most respected company in Slovenia. The philosophy of leadership was the theme of yesterday's main panel. Therefore, allow me to conclude with a quote from Mr. Škrabec on leadership. I quote, "To lead means to know why people do what they do, why they feel what they feel, and to set goals for them on this basis. I'm not interested in the increase in value unless it implies the creation of values." Mr. Škrabec, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Brian. I am flattered, really. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the business part of the Bled Strategic Forum, which brings together here by the lake, this wonderful lake, progressively select experts, leaders in management, business, politics, and culture. Economic diplomacy has an especially pronounced and increasingly important role, both before and after the forum. It opens and implements new initiatives and connections. The high level of the participants and widespread international involvement have placed the forum among the meetings of global importance in its 9 years. Business is what drives the world around. It crosses borders, awakens ideas, expands the entrepreneurial spirit, and brings to life the best potentials in the places that have not been active until just recently. Business generates new values. It is a source of wealth, a creative challenge, a call to collaboration, new blood in the economic, financial, and cultural currents. I sometimes say that if I were not a businessman, I would certainly work in the arts or philosophy. This is because I'm interested in people, their thoughts, and reactions. I want to understand the time that I live in. All this opens up before me as an entrepreneur and fulfills me, making me feel the others too are developing and growing richer with me. Southeast Europe, which begins here beneath the Alps, all the way to the Bosphorus, is in this moment a real challenge for business. Not only that the landscape must be revived after the last Balkan War, and the Greece must be brought to stand up again after the crisis. There is also Europe's bridge towards the Turkey, or Turkey's bridge toward Europe, as you wish. A bridge as an exchange of values, cultures, experiences, and traditions. The Bled Forum is the right platform for entering this space through dialogue and plans, to new business cultures and the presentations, since to succeed in business, it is necessary to make others see things as you see them, as was said by one of the most famous businessmen from this region, the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. And again, I would like to mention the role of economic diplomacy, bringing together different points of view in this region. Bled Strategic Forum provides answers for the future and from the future. The introduction to today's discussion, which is about to follow, takes us in this direction. This is because the winners of the Young Strategic Forum for the Best Business Project will be announced. Danica Purk, Dean of the Bled School of Management, and the heart of this forum, is certainly pleased. Her tireless efforts, extensive knowledge, and sincere commitment provide results that go beyond borders and generations. Thank you for all this, Danica. And of course, special thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the Minister, Mr. Karel Erjavec. Thank you. I know that you see the economic diplomacy as one of the most important missions, which is also confirmed by its share in the organization of its forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schrabers, for your opening remarks. And now we'll proceed to the second part, the award ceremony for the Young Bled Strategic Forum Business Case Competition. I invite to the podium Mr. Timotei Shosh, Young BSF Director, my colleague at the Ministry, and a dear friend, to tell us more. Please, Timotei.
Thank you, Brian. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ministers. The Young BSF Business Case Competition opened this year's Young Bled Strategic Forum with 7 teams of postgraduate students and young entrepreneurs from top universities worldwide, competing to find strategic solutions for a selected potential new state-owned enterprise called Slovenian Forest Limited. The background of the enterprise in Slovenian forestry was given to the competitors in business case file, which is also available this morning in print for all of you who would like to have it, and it's also on the website of the Bled Strategic Forum. There you can also find all the presentations and all the details that the teams have prepared. The teams received the case on Wednesday, on 27th of August, and they had 40 hours to examine and analyze the company and prepare strategic reports for the management. On Friday morning, teams presented their proposals to the judging panel chaired by Dr. Petar Kraljic, Director Emeritus at McKinsey & Company. Members of the judging panels were Ms. Maria Anselmi, General Manager, Southern Market at Bisnode, Mr. Gregory Bacho, Associate Principal at McKinsey & Company, Ms. Nada Drobne-Popovic, Senior Executive at Slovenian Sovereign Holding, Mr. Japec Kupin, Board Member of Slovenian Business Club, Mr. Jost Jakša, Director General for Forestry at our Ministry for Agriculture and Environment of Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Damian Oražan, Acting Director of Slovenian Forest Service, and Ms. Tanja Rupnik, Investment Project Manager at Rico Group. So those were the members of the judging panel. The winning team will take home the main prize of 2,500 euros this morning, and we will listen to their presentation. So today we will listen to one presentation, the winning one. Now the competing teams. The competing teams were Team Gelbo from Copenhagen Business School, IDC team from IDC Bled School of Management, Team Tsunami from the University of Tokyo, Team HSG from University of St. Gallen from Switzerland, Kailin team from China Europe International Business School, Excellence Warriors from Indian School of Business, and Slovenian team named UL team comprised by AmCham Slovenia. Now I would like to ask the chair of the judging panel, Dr. Petar Kraljic, and Mr. Jan Dabčević, head of the business case competition and the case writer, to announce the winner and hand over the award. Then we will listen their presentation. Dr. Kraljic and Mr. Dabčević, please.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, for me it was a pleasure and honor to be the chair of the panel looking at the Young Businessman Case Competition, particularly because there's an old statement in Slovenia, na mladima svet ostaje. The young people will build this world. And we have seen 7 excellent teams from all over the world, you have heard, from Tokyo all the way to St. Gallen. And it was a very tight race because they were excellent proposal, and the representatives of the Ministry of Forestry who were there couldn't believe how many good new ideas came up, and just wanted to combine all 7 presentations into one plan, how to improve the performance of our forestry, which should be the case. The second important thing was that I'm very pleased that Mr. Riavet, that you have selected this forum on the power of trust. Because trust is something, Mrs. Purk mentioned it, which we need in this world. Trust first in our own strengths, trust into our environment, trust into our leaders, politicians, managers, and so on. And there is a little formula somewhere for trust, I read it some times ago, which says trust is a combination of competence, reliability, and openness or honesty divided by egoism. The less egoistic we are when we deal with the other, the more trust we will build. It takes a long time to build trust, but you can destroy it in a second. But the 7 teams we have seen built a lot of trust into the panel, and I think that's why I'm very glad to see that we have such future leaders among us. The decision of the panel was very difficult. As I said, it was 7 comparable 7 very powerful teams with comparable, not comparable approach, but with comparable ideas at the end. And we had then 3 in the closer competition. And then at the end, we took holistical view, both looking at the logic and results of the team, and also including the longer term perspective and holistically the adaptation of that logic, which is needed in every business, also to environment. Because whenever we do a business decision, we should not only take just the cool numbers. We should also consider emotions and the ability to implement the thing. I have learned that in India, that the Indians said to me, if you consider the emotions of the people you are dealing with, you can change or you can move the mountains. So I'm very proud to announce in the name of the panel that the winning team is the team HSG, University of St. Gallen, Switzerland. Compliment. But I would just like to finish with a statement which we had in the panel that we would wanted to give the medal to all 7 of the teams. We had to decide on one. So consider yourself the first among equals, which is important because the game is a team game. And we can only win if we share the same destiny and the same objectives. So we would now hand over the check, which is signed by me. I thought 42.5 million. I was a little bit scared, but 2,500. Okay, so where is the winning team to accept the...
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Congratulations. Congrats.
So thanks again to all the 7 teams. Compliment to the countries you're coming from, because this is a sign of the future leadership. Now the floor is yours, my dear friends. And one last thing, Mr. Riaus, if you allow. I'm very supportive of what you do with your economic diplomacy. But we should also think about diplomatic economy, because these young people will be managers, and a good manager today in globalized world also has to be diplomat. So I think we have here a good combination of what you want to achieve and what these people will have to carry forward. Thank you and have a good day.
Adam, would you mind to join us? Dear ladies, dear gentlemen, welcome to our presentation. Today we are going to talk about an innovative business model for the Slovenian forestry industry. And we are Adam from Hungary, Budapest, who has an experience in strategic consulting, Andrej from Ljubljana, Slovenia, whose focus is on financial management, And I am Maxim with a focus on innovation management, and I grew up in Berlin, Germany. Before we start with the business model, I'd like to tell you a short story. A week ago, we came to Slovenia and we ended up in Ljubljana, in the castle. Down there is a really beautiful small museum, and there we encountered this gentleman, Martin Krpan. He's a very strong man, and we loved his story so much. Probably most of you know it. And actually, we did not know why we liked this guy so much. And only after solving this case, we actually found out why. And the reason is to be revealed by the end of our presentation. So basically, the goal was to come up with a new strategy, how the Slovenian forestry can be used to a much better way, how the forests can be utilized. And there are three main challenges. The first one was that the return on assets of the Slovenian forests is not as good as of other companies, of the neighboring countries. The second challenge was that actually the ownership structure is highly fragmented, and that is a core issue from our perspective. And the third challenge was actually, well, based on our solution, the company, the new established company, Slovenian Forests Industry, will have some profits. So how can we invest the profits in the most value-adding way? And the solution was to establish the Slovenian Valley, which is a science and technology park that will foster entrepreneurship based with a focus on wood processing industry. Our goal was to combine all three solutions and come up with a new holistic business model. So how does this business model look like? Well, that's the status quo. Right now, we have the SFS and the fund, which are totally separate entities. And the new business model will combine both entities under one roof, the Slovenian Forests Limited. And who else do we have in the playing field in the forests industry? Well, we have the small private owners. There are more than 320,000 of them, and they are not using the forests at all mainly, and they are not willing to sell it either. So basically, what can we do? We're establishing a reversed concession model where we are buying the right to use their land, not their land, so they're still owners. So we're buying the right. However, we are not processing the forest by ourselves because we simply don't have the capacity, neither the capability to do this. That's why we took a look and we asked ourselves, who is capable of utilizing these forests in a better way? And there are actually two parties. It's the private companies who already do this and the large private forest owners or forest farms. They are able to use and to utilize this. So basically, we are taking the concessions from the private small owners and we are combining them and redirecting them to the guys who can use it in a better way. And obviously, they are giving us some fees back. And as these fees will be slightly higher than the fees which we are paying to the small private owners, we are creating some profit. And now the question was how to invest this profit in the most profitable way. So we are establishing the Slovenian Valley, which is a science and technology park with a focus on entrepreneurship. So once again, we see that with this part, we are tackling the fragmental system, the fragmental ownership system of the forests. With this part, we are trying to enhance the efficiency of the Slovenian forest industry, and this one is about reinvesting in the most value-adding way. Before we dive into the three pillars, Adam, what's the status quo?
So thank you, Max. And it's always important to understand what are the main goals of a company. And in this case, for the state-owned company, these are the four main goals. The first one is we need to replace the current business model. The second one is we would like to increase the return on assets. And the third one is we should be able to stabilize the market in times of high uncertainty. And the fourth one is we would like to reinvest the profit in tourism, in education related to the forestry industry. So what did we do with this information? We came up with a long list of possible solutions. and we try to be down to earth and out of the box at the same time. So we came up with solutions like maybe we should do paintball in the forest to do something else, but taking into account our financial and non-financial criteria, we narrow down our approaches to 3 that you have already heard. So we should start with the first one. So the basic challenge is we would like to increase the return per hectare to 40 euro in 5 years. We have the solution. We need to transform the current concession business model. And we believe that it would result in 20 million euros of net present value in 5 years. But why do we even need to change the current concession business model? On the left side, you can see a more qualitative approach. And as you can see, the two most important things here is that there is a high risk of corruption with the current model. And the second one is that the minimal fee setting up cannot guarantee the proper revenue from this business model. Actually, on the right side, we did some benchmark analysis. So we took into account those countries that have similar ownership structure as Slovenia has. And we found out that the return per hectare, for example, in the case of Austria, it's almost 50 euro, as compared to Slovenia, where it's around 4. So what can we do? Basically, we think that there are two generic ways to reinvent this business model. Renew the concession or cancel the concession. Based on our analysis and the discussion with industry experts, we can't really cancel the concession and do something on our own in raw material or wood processing, because we don't have the capabilities, we don't have the experience. So we need to start with the current concession model. But with the current terms, it's not feasible. So basically the question is, how should we re-engineer the current concession model? And on the next slide, you can see that our main goal is to increase the return on assets. So we need to change the current business model as to have a higher net income. And when it comes to the higher net income, we can either go to the revenue side or the cost side. On the right side, you can see the main cost items, and based on the discussion with forestry expert, we found out that there is only one cost of item that is out of the line, and that is the felling cost. So basically, we can decrease the cost of felling cost from 25 euro to 20 euro, so there is 20% cost cutting. But it's obvious that it's not enough for the new business model to really achieve something with the return per hectare. So we also need to tap onto the revenue side. So basically, we came up with a 3-step process to increase the revenue. The first step is the design of concession. The second one is the award of concession. And the third one is operation and logging. Without going too much in the details, I would like to emphasize 2 key points here. And the first one is we need to reallocate the lands into smaller and more homogeneous lands and establish a standardized evaluation for these businesses, for these lands, so we can have a timber value, a minimal fee that is more in line with the timber value. Apart from that, the second most important step, we believe, is the auction bidding system, such as you can see with eBay. So we believe that with these re-engineering processes, we can deliver a net present value of 20 million euros. As you can see, we build up a financial model with 3 scenarios: a base scenario, a cost-cutting scenario, and a revenue plus scenario. So we have the money. So what can we do with it?
Thank you, Max and Adam. Well, in the next step, we wanted to solve the problem of fragmentation. And as Max already pointed out, we propose a plan called reversed concessions, which would result in net present value of 1.2 million euros. In Slovenia, more than 70% of forests are owned by more than 320,000 individuals, and that's problematic due to the following 2 reasons. First of all, on the right-hand side, you can see that owners in Slovenia don't harvest their forests. It is either due to lack of knowledge, equipment, maybe the prices are too low or the costs are too high. But based on how much land they have, it simply doesn't make sense for them to go through with it. But on the left side, you have a much more interesting side to the story, which is that people in Slovenia are very reluctant to sell their forests. You have 3 quotes here, and they're all by the same person. This person is my father, and he, like many other Slovenians, believes that forest is not just an asset, but it's also a part of your heritage, and now more than ever, also a valuable source of renewable energy. So taking all this into an account, we asked ourselves, how can we increase utilization? And the idea is pretty simple. What we would want to do, we would want to apply the model Adam talked about, the new concession model, but this time not on the public land, but on the privately owned land. So in the beginning, we would first want to convince the private owners to give the right to harvest the forest to this new enterprise, SFL, and the owners would in return receive fee plus education. So that's the idea. Now, why did we even consider that? Well, we looked at the past practices, and we looked at those that failed. Namely, we looked at associations. They never really worked out because of the distrust. So what happened was that people agreed upon something, but they never really went through with it. So they still sold material on the side. And obviously in Slovenia, we also have bad experiences with socialism. We believe that reversed concessions would be different because first of all, they are built on trust, since government will stand behind it and offer guarantees. Second, many forest owners don't use their forest at all, so at least they could cover certain costs, since having a forest has costs of its own as well. And the third point, which is the most important one, is that we found a survey stating that more than 60% of people would consider felling more trees if the prices were higher. So what we started to think here was that, well, profit obviously does play a role. And that's what we want to do. The fund would give money to the SFS. SFS has information about all the private owners. And they would in turn employ additional 55 people who would contact the private owners and try to convince them to go through with this reverse concession model. And if not, at least try to find out what the reason is. We estimated the conversion rate based on cold calls and tweaked it a bit based on our expertise. And we ended up with a conversion rate between 1% and 2% in the first year. We believe that this would be rising throughout the years due to good practices. And this conversion rate would also depend whether these owners are currently already in contact with SFS or whether they are not. So this is the final result. On the left-hand side, you can see how the number of people who would agree for reversed concessions and consequently also the number of hectares being utilized, how both of these numbers would increase throughout the years. And the right-hand side, you can see the final result after 5 years. We estimate that more than 19,000 people would agree for reversed concessions, which would result in more than 55,000 hectares being utilized in addition. And also, based on the MPVs, you can see that the reversed concessions, the plan that we propose, is indeed profitable. And now I give my word to Max, who's going to introduce you the third pillar.
Thank you, Andre. Well, the third pillar is all about reinvesting the money. So those two gentlemen made some profit with their projects, and how are we using these profits? The goal is to establish the Slovenian Valley. And basically, by doing this, we're tackling several issues at the same time. First of all, by enhancing the new technologies, we can really enhance the wood processing industry. Furthermore, unemployment can be tackled, education, and of course, entrepreneurship will be fostered. Well, as Mr. Židan said, new ideas and innovation are key, and we totally agree. For us, it's not only the key, it's really the solution. So the Slovenian Valley is a science and technology park which will foster entrepreneurship with the focus on the wood processing industry, with the focus on green technologies. And as a benchmark, we took a look at several technology parks around the world. And obviously, as we are studying in Switzerland, we took a look at the Technopark Zurich. And it's really a state-of-the-art project which has an impact on the whole economy. We actually had the chance to pitch there and to see that things really are changing. Because the numbers speak for themselves. More than 100 companies were founded, and some of them are a huge success, such as Doodle. So the next step was to see, well, is it actually feasible to start the Slovenian Valley in Slovenia? And yes, based on our analysis, we took a look at several criteria. So the proximity of transportation, the presence of universities, and space availabilities were checked. So yes, it does make sense. And actually, right now, at this very moment, 2 warehouses are being sold in Ljubljana, which can be transformed into the Slovenian Valley. So does this whole project make sense? Well, the answer is clear, no, if you take a look only at the monetary side. Because obviously, the costs, the yearly costs of 400,000 outweigh the profits from the tenants, which is 240,000. However, it's not only about the monetary side here. It's rather about the non-monetary side, because entrepreneurship will be fostered. New technologies can be implemented for the wood processing companies, and new startups, such as the climbing part, where the idea is that owners do not harvest their forest, but rather utilize it in another way, and enhance also the tourism, the local tourism in Slovenia. So, just a quick summary. We had 3 different challenges, which is basically increasing the return on assets, tackling the fragmentation of the ownership in Slovenia, and reinvesting the money in the most value-adding way. We came up with the business model, which is holistically targeting those 3 issues. On the right-hand side, it's about the fragmentation. Down here, it's about increasing efficiency. And on the left-hand side, it's about reinvesting into the Slovenian valley. So as promised, the story about Martin Krpan. Well, we love the story so much because what he actually did was to use forest, to use wood in an innovative way by protecting himself from a much stronger opponent and chopping off his head. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. You have seen that was a team that was chosen, but I repeat, we could as well chosen any other of the 6 teams. So in fact, there were 7 winners, and I think the benefit of that should go to Slovenian forestry. And the only warning I would say, you might not know how the story of Martin Krpan ended. The last word in there is Minister Gregor Panic, which means Minister Gregor didn't say anything. So I hope that our minister will act based on what was proposed here. Thank you, compliments to the team again, and have a nice continuation.
Thank you. And now I ask Mr. Petar Žerjavić, the moderator of the next portion of this opening, to take the floor, and he will introduce our speakers and take us to the next round, please.
Good morning, ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to have an opportunity to moderate the discussion today about the subjects of utmost importance for Europe. Let me briefly make just a few points to introduce the issue and speakers. The power of trust is quite a powerful expression. Trust has a huge role both in politics and in the economy. Growing distrust might be quite a big problem for the recovery in Europe. For instance, people could say, we cannot stand this anymore. We have enough of austerity and imposed reforms. So one of the main challenges is how to rebuild trust and consensus on the policies that are being proposed. In years ahead of us, I think we will have quite a bumpy ride. Our guests are heads of 2 institutions, the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They both enjoy quite a remarkable level of trust. The appointment of Sir Suma Chakrabarty to the president of the EBRD two years ago was maybe a surprise. Namely, all 5 previous presidents were either French or German, I think. Prior to joining the EBRD, Sir Chakrabarty served as permanent secretary at the UK's Ministry of Justice. We have to say the EBRD has the unique know-how in supporting the transition to open market in Europe and elsewhere. That's why it will be very interesting to hear what are their plans in the Western Balkans. Now I would kindly invite Mr. Chakrabarty to give an opening address.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to give, together with my good friend, EIB President Werner Hoyer, the opening address of the Business Forum in Bled. It's a real pleasure to be back in Bled, although I've been away 2 years and the weather doesn't seem to have improved at all. But it's great to be back. It's also humbling to be back here after hearing Team HSG, after hearing Adam, Andre, and Maxime talk. It really does actually reinvigorate the faith I have actually in our continent, in its ability to renew and refresh actually. And I'm looking forward to the Slovenian forestry people pitching to EBRD with a project maybe based on some of what you put forward. It was really, really wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, the power of trust is the title of this year's strategic forum. Trust is, of course, a fundamental foundation for all business endeavors. Trust is also central to making progress in economic transition. It matters between business partners. Trust matters between governments and the citizens they govern. And trust matters between countries in regional economies and the global economy. Without trust, countries get, in the words of the EBRD's last transition report, they get stuck in transition. Now, for more than 2 decades, the EBRD has been a trusted partner in our countries of operation. We've been committed to supporting our countries, including those in Central and Southeastern Europe. And during the recent crisis, we've sort of become reinvigorated ourselves, and we've invested at historically record levels, including in this region. But the point I want to make is investment itself isn't really enough. We have successful projects in many countries, but some of which now continue to look as quite unsuccessful, where transition hasn't really lived up to the initial promise. Now, there are many economic, many political reasons for this, but sometimes it does come down to a lack of trust. And one of the lessons that we've learned in EBRD since 1991 is that progress can be hollow unless it's built on very solid institutional foundations. The business environment and economic governance, they matter. Efficient public service matters, and inclusion also matters. Trust between all players is important, and much more has to be done to build it. Now, in our efforts to support the countries where we invest, to re-energize their transition, and to restore and strengthen the trust of citizens in institutions and in their authorities, the EBRD focuses and intends to focus even more on policy dialogue with reform-minded counterparts, supporting policies and institutions that are vital for the region's resilience and helping to improve the business environment. Now, these efforts are at the heart of the bank's roadmap for the coming years. They're about a much more active approach to re-energizing transition. Now, extending trust beyond borders is also crucial to increasing opportunities and growth. And I'm very pleased to see that at the last 2 panels, at least 2 of the panels, at this forum are devoted to related topics: interconnectivity in Southeastern Europe and regional cooperation in the Western Balkans. My colleagues accompanying me here in Bled, who work directly on these issues, will be ready to provide more detail on those panels about the bank's role and plans in this respect. But let me say the following. Integration through energy interconnections, through transport corridors, through the integration of financial systems and cross-border investment, these are vital for this region's economic success and its success in transition. And EBRD is going to actively promote this comprehensive integration agenda, without which trust in the whole region cannot progress. In regions like the Western Balkans, integration and regional cooperation are also indispensable for building trust and political stability. The recent level of regional cooperation is one of the region's greatest achievements in recent years, a valuable experience which we'd like to share with our countries of operations in other transition regions. And that's why the EBRD, back in February, organized a high-level summit, the Investing in Western Balkans Summit, in our London headquarters. That summit brought together, I believe for the first time, prime ministers of all the countries of the region, who were accompanied by the ministers and business leaders, as well as a few hundred existing and potential foreign investors interested in that region. We successfully promoted the region as a whole as an attractive investment destination, but we also embarked on a serious dialogue on the priorities and coordination of regional policies, and we intend to continue this dialogue. And it was agreed in principle with the Prime Ministers that EBRD would organise and host a follow-up meeting in early 2016. Now, advancing regional integration, building trust, it's a result, of course, of a myriad of products. An example of our efforts to advance regional integration is the creation of a really special project, the SEE Link. This is a joint stock company established by the Bulgarian, Macedonian, and Croatian stock exchanges with the help of EBRD. This platform now supports the development of regional capital markets by connecting the existing exchanges and overcoming the current fragmentation, but without merging them. So projects can also play a part in this integration and the building of trust. Finally, and with Werner here, I must say this, it's really important, I want to mention the importance of coordination, both among the key international players, such as international financial institutions, the European Commission, bilateral donors, as well as beneficiaries from the region. That coordination has really improved in recent years and started to deliver, I believe, tangible benefits to the region. Joint IFI's Action Plan for Growth for Central and Southeastern Europe, launched at the end of 2012, has now generated 30 billion euros of new investment in 2013 and 2014. EIB has played a very big role in that, along with EBRD and the World Bank. The Western Balkans investment framework allows the international development players that are active in this region, the recipient countries, and the EU to finance critical projects in infrastructure and other sectors. And together, I really believe we've got to continue to strengthen these platforms for cooperation in meeting the investment needs of the region and paying particular attention to the challenge of strengthening regional ownership. This region has come a long way in recent years, but trust must continue to be built, and EBRD is going to be very proactive in that task, helping to produce stronger growth and more resilient economies. And ladies and gentlemen, if I can finish with a word on Slovenia. If ever there was a country where the themes of integration and trust are highly relevant today, then that is Slovenia. We have to recognize that this great country has, in recent years, stumbled in its transition. Its future economic progress depends on closer integration regionally, within Europe, but also into a more global economy. And that's why I'm very pleased to see investors and political decision makers from Europe, but also the wider world here at the forum. But integration is not going to be enough. Slovenia's transition also depends on rebuilding trust in its institutions. In part, this is about creating a new climate of political decision-making, a new political culture. But in part, it's also about allowing institutions in Slovenia to function effectively, efficiently, and impartially. And it's within such a framework for re-energizing transition, that the EBRD and other international financial institutions can play a significant role going forward in revitalizing transition and growth. We stand ready to support Slovenia in tackling these challenges ahead. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sir Chakrabarti, thank you for your very interesting thoughts. Our second guest is Dr. Werner Hoyer. He has become the president of the EIB in 2012. He has a PhD in economics. Since middle 70s, he has been active in politics. In the second government of the Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel, Mr. Hoyer served as State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. EIB has traditionally financed large projects in the past years. Considerable efforts have been additionally taken to support small and medium-sized enterprises. One of the focuses of the EIB is on the infrastructure, not only on roads and railways, but also on the cables, energy routes, communication network. As regards the Western Balkans, the EIB is the biggest international lender in the region. Dr. Hoyer, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today together with my friend Suma Chakrabarti and to address this distinguished audience. A lot has been said, what I shouldn't repeat because obviously EBRD and EIB are cooperating very well and coordinating very well also in this region. It is always heartwarming for me to come back to Slovenia. When I was in government and in parliament in the 90s, and I remember very, very complex decision-making that had to be taken at that time, and the question marks that had been put behind the early recognition of Slovenia, then I must say in hindsight, this trust that has been placed into the Slovenian people has fully paid off. So it is really a great feeling to be back in a country which within 23 years has become a full member of the European Union, of NATO, and the Eurozone. And of course, I'm aware of huge challenges that can be met, have to be met, but they will be met with the trust and the confidence of your neighbors and friends in the European Union. There is another trust-building and confidence-building measure I've experienced today. That was the presentation of the winners of this competition. When we were asked after the natural disaster that hit Slovenia recently to speed up and increase our financing, also in the field of forestry, I said, okay, we are ready to do that, and we invested heavily into this effort. But to be honest, you always have the question, what are they going to do with that? How are they going to do it? Well, I know which school now to turn to if we need people who can give us advice how to best be of assistance when it comes to cleaning up a mess in the forests like the one that nature had brought over Slovenia recently. This 9th Bled Strategic Forum falls as the leaders of Europe's main governing institutions, Commission, Parliament, Council, and not to forget NATO, change guard amid a myriad of challenges. A still too weak economy and the crisis in relations with Russia over Ukraine, just to name two, and I'll return to these in a minute. The challenges, which are political, economic, and social at the same time in nature, are complex enough on their own. What makes them doubly difficult to deal with is the fact that they almost all interlink. Some of us believe that solutions can be found through closer European cooperation, in short, more Europe, and I believe that. But the recent European Parliament elections showed that the minority, yes, it is still a minority, does not share that vision. Once again, therefore, Europe would appear to stand at a crossroads in its development. I can think of no better place to debate these challenges than in a country that has itself been at the crossroads of Europe's history since Roman times. As president of the EU Bank, and we are a part of the setup of the Treaty of Rome since 1958, I'm happy that we have been able to accompany Slovenia on part of this journey, helping finance vital infrastructure from roads to gas transmission networks and the port of Koper that have helped in the process of integration. With EU membership, Slovenia, like Croatia, has become one of our shareholders, and we are now extending support to the other countries of the Western Balkans as part of our mission to support the accession process. But today, I'd like to touch on other challenges. The Ukraine crisis, as well as reviving the fundamental question of the nature of that country's relations with EU and NATO, has cast a spotlight once again on the dependence of large parts of Europe on Russian energy supplies and the pipelines that deliver them. No doubt, these questions will be examined in today's panel on interconnecting Southeast Europe. It is also having a destabilizing effect on Europe's recovery that had appeared until last month's second quarter GDP data to be largely on track. As President Mario Draghi of the European Central Bank has noted, it seems likely that this fresh economic uncertainty now is having a knock-on effect on business investment. And I fully share this concern, because also this has something to do with trust. However, while Ukraine, or more accurately, the sanctions imposed on Russia and vice versa, may be the trigger for the latest uncertainty, the sad truth is that investment in Europe collapsed some time ago. By 2013, roughly 5 years after the start of the global financial crisis, total investment across the European Union was 20% below its peak in 2007, and in some of the countries worst hit by the crisis by 40%. In other words, now for 6, soon 7 years, we are back 20% behind the investment that we were used to at the end of the last decade. And at the same time, we have to note the fact that for a period of 10 years now, the member states of the European Union on average, and there are very peaks upwards, are trailing behind ASEAN, India, Japan, North America when it comes to innovation, to research, to education. Now, this combination of this gap of investments, and this with the fact that we are investing so much less in the innovative developments of our societies and industries, will have an effect on the role of Europe in the globalization process. And we must overcome, therefore, urgently our complacency in Europe if we want to maintain here and there at least our competitive edges, if we want to be ambitious in the global competition, and we should not believe that this can be taken for granted. So it takes a new, a fresh effort. The competitiveness of economies depends on the capacity of firms and industries to drive and adapt to change through innovation, raise productivity, and establish a presence in key strategic sectors. For this, we need to create the framework conditions for doing business, from good infrastructure to completing our single market and reforming our labor, product, and service market. Well-targeted public intervention, and public intervention has always the need to be justified, public intervention. But it can help to close a number of gaps, from investment in infrastructure, R&D, human capital, and the financing of young, innovative firms, the theme of today's last session. This is why the European Investment Bank, the EU Bank, in the last 15 years has moved away from financing only large infrastructure projects and now focuses a large part of its energies on soft areas. When we were founded in the Treaty of Rome, the key perspective was help the Mezzogiorno, because they had been least profited or benefited from the Marshall Plan. So it was big infrastructure tickets with long-term financing that were in the foreground. Since then, until today, these things have changed completely. Still, strategic infrastructure is key, be it roads, a port like Koper, be it broadband technology that needs to be based on data center and transmission lines, be it energy grids and so forth. But beyond that, nowadays, it's at least a quarter of our activities that goes into innovation, research, technology, and the transfer of technological progress into new products and production processes. Another quarter is going into renewable energies and the future of energy efficiency. And nowadays, it is in view of the market failure in the field of access to finance for small and medium-sized companies, this very important group of our industrial structure that gets our attention. Last year, the EU Bank invested 23 billion euros into 230,000 SMEs across the European Union and partly beyond. 10% of our business is outside the European Union. Our new joint financial instrument with the EU research budget, InnoFin, is precisely designed to address the investment gaps that hold up development of the knowledge economy, as countries associated with the EU and to the EU research budget, the Western Balkans and Turkey are all eligible partners for us in this regard. New rules governing structural funds of the Union for the next 7 years also oblige member states to devote more resources to future growth areas such as innovation, and we stand ready to accompany them directly or through our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund. By catalyzing private sector investment, but catalyzing private sector investment is also key indeed, and perhaps more important in today's environment in which the scope for action in many public budgets remains constrained. So it is, particularly on the EU scale, but also on the national scale, important to shift more from grant financing to guarantees and better use of public funds in our budgets. We can have a huge multiplier this way. That is why I welcome today's discussion on foreign direct investment from such a large and important partner country as India. Certainly, and I'm convinced of it, there is scope for much closer economic ties, not only between Slovenia and India, but between the European Union and India. Incoming President Jean-Claude Juncker has set out the goal to mobilize up to 300 billion euro in additional public and private investment in the real economy over the next 3 years. And as the EU Bank, we stand ready to support his proposal where we can. But while we focus our attention internally, we must not forget the needs of wider Europe. The events in eastern Ukraine are a reminder, if one were needed 20 years of the tragedies that took place just a few hundred kilometers south of here, that instability on Europe's doorstep brings with it human costs that dwarf short-term economic considerations. So closer integration, also in this region, is ultimately the only way to heal wounds and to overcome mutual suspicions. And I'm happy if we can contribute to that through our own small part in supporting the projects that make that integration a reality. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to inform you that we have 15 minutes more for the subsequent discussion. Of course, I would like to include many views or questions into the debate, especially, of course, from the audience. I'm going to start with my question. Dr. Hoyer, Sir Chakrabarti, growth in Europe is still weak and uneven. How do you see more offensive approach to strengthen growth and competitiveness? The question is how to convince the politicians to pursue the reform agenda. The new president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, once said, quote, "We all know what to do, we just don't know how to get re-elected after we have done it." How to break this vicious circle?
The response to that question qualifies me immediately for the Nobel Peace Prize and the Economics Prize at the same time. So obviously this is the big problem. Most of the acting people in that scene know what needs to be done. But we have a communication problem, how to convince people that the negative effects that are unavoidable in this context have to be accepted by bringing about a perspective of improvement that many people in a country like Greece don't see yet. So this is very difficult. Second point. I think some of the commentators and also political leaders in the countries a little less affected by the crisis should take into consideration what a huge effort is being done in the countries in trouble. Because I'm wondering whether the reform efforts that have been undertaken in Portugal, in Ireland, in this country, in Greece, in Cyprus, and other places, would have been possible in these complacent societies like my own country. So we have to recognize that is what is being done requires huge efforts and also huge sacrifice, not only by the people who have to endure that, but also by the politicians who risk their own future by doing what they believe needs to be done. And thirdly, I think the main thing is that we need to restore trust, not in the immediate sense, but also in the sense of confidence building, because if we do not energize and modernize our societies and economies, I think there will be a lack of confidence in the future of Europe in the globalization process. On the other hand, if we finally find more intelligent ways how to overcome the investment gap and the innovation gap, which is even more important for me, then I believe that there is a much brighter future for Europe and the member states of the European Union. But it takes political leadership, and I wouldn't say that I always see that.
Thank you. Just add, I agree very much with Werner, what he said about that. I think the trite answer, of course, is to make sure you get a very large majority and you can serve for 2 terms. But, it is difficult for politicians because in any adjustment process, there are winners and losers. And that's a difficult sell in any democratic system. We know that. But I do think there is, I think in Europe now, a set of leaders who have been talking about the national interest, trying to talk above the party interest, and who have therefore tried to do what's been the right thing for their countries. And we have not done a good job in advertising the successes that have happened. And Werner mentioned a number of the countries, but actually if you look at the data on productivity growth in some of those countries, it's quite startling, Greece included. Actually, there's been quite a lot of improvement in these countries, but who knows about this? Very few people. So I think politicians, but also the commentators, are not yet doing a good enough job at marketing the change as well. At the end of the day, of course, until people feel the change in their pockets in terms of consumer confidence, business confidence, they're not going to believe this. So I think one does have to deliver this as well. So implementation is crucial. But leadership, which is in the national interest, those are the politicians that I liked working for, I still like working with. Those are the people that really matter, and we need to support them more actively, I think, going forward.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions already? Yes, Mr. Kralic.
It's good to be optimistic and to say we can do a lot if you look at the efforts which have been done. You mentioned Greece and some others. But we have also to be realistic, I think. You talk about Western Balkan, which is a new invention. Why don't we talk about Balkan? Because this is Balkan. Because you can include Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania. And this is a wound on Europe. This is a country which have one common denominator. They're not competitive. They don't invest enough into R&D, innovation, and so on, the thing you are mentioning. And we need a much stronger effort and much more realistic effort to turn these countries around. And you talk about the leadership. The leadership in these countries, most of those is not trusted, if you talk about the trust. If you look at any numbers analyzing those countries, you see the trust of people in the leadership is zero or close to zero. So on one side, I am always optimistic, and I really am supporting whatever Europe is doing, what EBRD is doing, and the others in this area. But we should be more realistic and say, how can we change this Balkan from what it is to become a real strong right wing or whatever it is if you take the other side of Europe? How realistic are we in this assessment? We shouldn't sound too optimistic or too naive.
Well, it's difficult for us here to make comments on the internal developments of member states of the European Union, but let me say that what disappoints me in the very close dialogue we have with the individual countries on the Balkans or the Western Balkans, don't make that differentiation, okay, is the fact that sometimes we are talking more about regional integration than they. And I believe that we as some institutions with a mandate to be of assistance should insist that the future is only with more integration and not with less, and therefore we should also concentrate on the links that need to be built, bridges that need to be built, tunnels that need to be built among countries of the region. And secondly, I think we who are bound by very strict legal frameworks, like the EU treaty and the secondary legislation of the European Union, for instance, we should impose very, very clear conditionality of what we are doing here. Because an institution like EBRD or EIB, doesn't make a difference, cannot have anything but a zero tolerance policy when it comes to clean procurement processes, when it comes to corruption, when it comes to the rule of law. These are some cases where we might make a little contribution. I think we cannot solve the problems here, but I think we can contribute to a somewhat clearer view of how it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add to that one can get pessimistic by looking at internal polls in various countries. But the flip side of this is you have 7 prime ministers coming to the EBRD in February, and then Angela Merkel calls them again last week. They get together. And these are people in countries which have fought wars for generations. But no longer are they talking about political differences, they're talking about economic unity and how to actually create investments that cross borders. Because they realize, as economic entities, they're not large enough, really, to justify some of the projects that they need. So this is actually quite a big change in mindset, and I think there's a new generation of leadership that's coming through. But secondly, I think Werner is absolutely right that we, and I tried to say this in my speech without naming names, but there have been countries where EBRD's projects, if you look at our projects or EIB's projects, are very successful. And yet the country looks no better than it did 23 years ago. Now this is unsuccessful countries, successful projects syndrome is something we really need to change because we want systemic change in these countries. So we have to care about governance issues, we have to care about corruption, we have to care about the investment climate, all those, the rule of law, all those issues that business leaders raise with us all the time. And perhaps we have not in the past been vocal enough in pushing back. So whether it's conditionality or in our personal dialogue, we have to say these things. And there are signs, in my view, of change in this. This is where my advisors get worried because I might name countries. But I will name a couple of countries. I think in what's happened in Albania, whereby they've moved towards an investment climate governance initiative involving RC, IB and others, is significant. I think what's happening in Serbia, where they now have a very large majority, of course, in parliament, and are able to push through changes which improve the investment climate, also in their EU approximation discussion, engaging with Kosovo in the way they are, this is significant change. I think what's happened here in the last couple of years, at least in beginning to start the clear up and the clean up of the corporate and banking sectors, is significant. Long way to go still in Slovenia, and we want to support that. But it's a significant shift in mindset. And I think we ought to applaud those efforts and try to generalize them more into other countries too.
More questions?
If there are no questions, then let me make one follow-up remark, what we both have just said. Sometimes I'm being asked, how can you have your mouth so full when you're commenting situations like in this region? Well, I think we have a right to, not to interfere, but to say, to express an opinion. The international community, represented by the international financial institutions, in particular the EU or European institutions, is extremely engaged here, and I think sometimes people don't know that. Our exposure in Slovenia is 11% of GDP of Slovenia. EIB alone. I'm not aware of the figures of EBRD. So there is a reason to say, as trustees, also the European taxpayers, we have a right to see that things move in the right direction and they're moving in correct ways. There is no country in the entire group of so-called new members of the European Union where the per capita investment of the European Investment Bank is as high as in Slovenia. People don't know that. So this is why I think we should tell people that Europe is doing something serious. And for all we need, all we do here, we need the trust, not of the political leaders only, but in particular the capital market, because every cent the European Investment Bank invests does not come from the taxpayer, but from the international capital markets. We need to have the trust of the people to receive, to sell our bonds for at least 80 billion euros per year. So this is why we have the right, I think, to express expectations that things move smoothly and correctly.
Mr. Hoyer has to leave us now.
Unfortunately, but the reason is the
course.
President of the Republic has invited me to be at his place at 11, and it would be not very polite if I let him wait. So I'd rather be unpolite vis-a-vis you. I'm sorry for that, I apologize, but I need to run in a few minutes.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you here today.
Thank
you.
See you later.
So we still have enough time for, I think, 1, 2, 3 questions. Yeah, gentleman back.
That relates the relationship between the EBRD and the local governments. I'm sure the EBRD on a daily basis deals with many governments in the region. So I'm wondering, what is the main challenge, or what are the main challenges that the organization faces when dealing with the governments from the region, and what are the ways to overcome those challenges?
Well, I think the main issues that are always under discussion are the ones we've been setting out earlier. So there are issues around policies, largely with governments, because most of the stuff that EBRD does at project level is private sector. So 80% of our projects are private sector projects, only 20% of the public sector. So because the private sector projects are commercially confidential, we don't discuss those with governments. So what we're generally trying to discuss with governments are investment climate issues, where their policies can affect whether foreign investors, domestic investors are attracted by investment in that country. We're trying to encourage them to adopt policies that will help investment, obviously. And these range from issues such as the behavior of customs and tax authorities. I'll give you an example. Ukraine in the past has been a difficult place for that sort of behavior, where we've tried to help clean up that area, through to the rule of law, how the commercial courts work in many countries, because commercial courts are fundamental to investors thinking about whether this is a place where they can have trust in the court system if things go wrong. So a range of sort of policy issues get discussed. Then we also talk quite often, and more I think recently, about institutions. So here with the acting Prime Minister, with the Prime Minister designate here in Slovenia, for example, we've been talking about institutions, about how to rebuild faith in institutions, which goes to the heart of how people feel about investing in Slovenia, but also how the citizens feel. So institutions, public institutions particularly, which operate in an effective, efficient and impartial way in the way I mentioned, and are not politicized. Those sorts of questions, that sort of dialogue takes place with many governments. And the other part of it is also, I think it's a very strong, important role for me and my senior staff, is to give examples of successes and why these were successes elsewhere, in order to give countries hope that often the challenges can be overcome. We've got to find solutions which are local and which work in the local environment, but there are examples of successes elsewhere which can be built on in these countries. So that's part of what we do as well. So it's a multifaceted dialogue, really, with governments.
Just a follow-up question. What are these so-called success stories you have mentioned?
So,
be more concrete.
So take an example would be privatization. So privatization in many of our countries of operations is people are worried about it, because what they tend to remember, of course, are the failed attempts or the unsuccessful attempts. What they don't tend to remember are the successful ones. Now, we're an organization that strongly believes in the private sector and strongly believes in moving into private ownership those things that the state shouldn't really be running. So that's a dialogue that we have with many governments. And part of my job and my senior staff's job is to give examples of where we've been successful with privatization. It's also very important in this dialogue to be actually honest. So where things have gone wrong, and you've learned from those, to point those out as well, and don't have a dishonest conversation. So it's very important to do that. But it's that sort of example, I would say.
Gentlemen, secretary.
Thank you very much. My name is Kieran Dowling. I'm the Irish ambassador to Slovenia, Croatia, and also Bosnia-Herzegovina. First of all, I'd like to compliment both the EBRD and the EIB. I'm fully personally aware of the excellent work they're doing generally, and I'd like to commend you on that work, Sir Suma, because it is vital. Investment and economic development is vital to a wider political development and so on and so forth. But when I asked for the floor, I was prompted by Dr. Hoyer's comments. One was, he said, integration is the future. And I'm directing these now in his absence to Sir Suma. He said integration is the future, and I absolutely agree with that. And he also mentioned about the fact that the EU necessarily must be bound by a lot of conditionality in terms of not compromising on certain things which you can't do, and that would also apply to the EBRD. So two things on that, and it's a broader question. How do we deal with Euroscepticism? Because I come from a very pro-Europe country. How do we convince the people who are not believers, and there are increasingly a lot of non-believers in the whole European project, how do we convince them? Secondly, on the conditionality, and it's related to the first question, I was at the Croatia Forum in July, as I was here 2 years ago when you were here last, Sir Suma, and the most interesting session for me was the last one, where you had a lot of NGOs and think tanks. And there was a strong point that if you have too much conditionality, you're actually playing into the hands of individual political leaders who, for particular reasons, do not want to go on the integration path. So by insisting on too much conditionality, there's the paradox that you're actually playing into the hands of people who, for the wrong reasons, in those countries are not interested in integration, and they're happy to be able to use the strong conditionality imposed as a reason for their objections.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. I think let me start with the second one, because it's obviously slightly easier for a Brit to answer than the first one. I think on the second one, I never use the word conditionality, because my mantra from, I guess, years of working in development in various continents is it's about ownership. There's absolutely no point, in my view, in us insisting that a country pursues a certain policy or else we won't lend at all. We probably won't lend anyway then, because it's not pursuing the right policy framework. But you don't make it a conditionality, because if they're not actually adhering to it, they're not really interested in it, they won't do it if they don't own it. So I much prefer to have the dialogue and try and persuade first that this is the right policy framework, and then lend into that policy framework rather than imposing a condition. We might have conditions on some of our project loans, but they tend to be very directly related to the project rather than the macro conditionality, if you like. Euroscepticism, well, I mean, coming from London, I'm feeling part of a dwindling band of pro-Europeans. But I think one of the ways to do it, to fight Euroscepticism generally, is to show benefits. And, I think there have been massive benefits in terms of the economic and social liberalism which underpins European integration. And I think we do a very poor job, those of us who are pro-Europeans, in talking about it, whether it's in the UK or in other countries. And, I think the idea that a Europe which goes back to a more protectionist, more autarkist sort of approach to economic policy particularly, would be successful, I think is simply wrong. And I think a lot of foreign investors should speak up more about this, non-Europeans. I'd love to hear Indians and Chinese here at Bled what they think about Euroscepticism. I don't think Europe would be as attractive to them if we went down that route. So we need to deploy their arguments too, as well.
So, any more questions maybe? If not, then I have to just to a little bit sum up. Dear speaker, dear audience, today's discussion has shown that the path of recovery in Europe will be a difficult one. In Southeast Europe, really more efforts to attract investors have to be taken. As I understood, the EIB and the EBRD, they are always so ready to help. Please allow me to stress one fact. So success in coping with difficulties is unimaginable without more trust, especially during the economic crisis. So to achieve the goal, we all have to and can do more. Sir Chakrabarti, it was a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you. And dear audience, thank you for the attention.